So you'd like me to just get started? Okay, sorry about that. Thank you. Well, thanks for the opportunity and to talk to you about an update to the county's on-site sewage system rules and regulations, Clark County Code 2417. My name is Chuck Harmon. I am the program manager for our water resources protection team, and we do on-site septic system permitting, operation and maintenance oversight, and also oversee drinking water wells and small public drinking water systems in this program. I wanted to move on and thanks counselors for taking time to listen about the update to the rules. And so I'd like to go down to the next slide. I don't think I have control. Thank you. So I wanted to start with a summary and an overview of the presentation. What I wanted to do with the presentation, there's a lot of changes in the rules. Many of those changes are sort of housekeeping, clarification, reorganization in some sections. And so I thought to make the best use of this time in the presentation part, I would highlight what we consider to be some of the more significant updates that I thought were worthy of bringing to your attention. And then there is obviously the markup of the rules themselves. And then as we were doing this work, we put together what we've called the matrix or tracking table. And that's intended to capture every single change that's in the code and providing a reason or an explanation. And again, that's been super helpful for us. And the hope was that it would also be helpful to the council members and the public eventually if they want to look at this. So in this presentation, I'll focus on some of the changes, but not all of the changes, since we only have about an hour. This work has occurred over the last couple of years through both internal work of myself and the team, and our leadership included our on-site sewage system technical advisory committee members. So we had multiple meetings with them to go through the rule changes and work through, differences of opinion and things like that. And so this is the result of that process. The last update to this chapter was in 2007. So it's been about 11 years since that. Oh, I'm sorry, 14 years. I got to do my math better. And then again, I just talked about the materials that we provided that hopefully help everyone sort of follow what we're doing and why we're doing it in the updates that we've proposed. And then once I'm through with the presentation, I'll certainly wanted to save some time for any questions. I guess I would say if there are any questions while I'm discussing this, certainly, yeah, we can stop and I can talk to those questions. So we'll start into the first section under 2417-010, the general policy section. This section at the very beginning of the code actually is there to refer to the county land use code about sewerage and whether or not you can have a septic system or need to connect to public sewer. Through our meetings with our advisory committee, they also proposed changes to 4037010, and this, which is pretty much matched in this part of the code. And so we are working. So what we've done with this section of the code is we've pretty much taken out the existing language because it's just basically a repeat of 4037010. We've made reference to it, and separately, I've been working with community planning to make a proposal and use their docket process to make these changes to propose changes to 4037010. Whatever happens in that process will just be referred to through our code. I hope I didn't make that too confusing, but basically, and the changes that we're proposing to that are to just change some of the distance requirements that are in there to match our code and to match state on-site septic system code. And I'm sure that through the docket process, that will be brought to the council's attention also if we propose additional updates to that, to 4037010. Okay. The next section is the definitions. There were several definition updates and some additions, but none of those, I just wanted to bring to your attention. It's a fairly large section, but again, all of those changes that are in there were again to either add definitions that weren't there in the current version of the code, but were in the code. And so we felt it was important to add some definitions. One of the examples is for verification. But again, most of those are just to help provide context and more detail to support those terms in the code. The next area that I wanted to highlight was in our own, in the connection to sewer code 24-17-080. We updated that language to align it with the state language in certain situations for an existing system, how you determine the distance from existing public sewer to the structure, the residential structure, and basically change it from going to the property line to the most usual route of access from existing sewer to the residence. And in that situation, it allows a little more flexibility for property owners that want to stay on septic and are far enough away from sewer that the cost and complexity of it would be more than it would be for putting in a septic system. And so, and again, the other reason that we changed that was to match the language in the state on-site septic system code. Our language in 07 apparently didn't, varied it slightly.
Chuck, were in that case, was this county code more restrictive than the state, or how was it changed?
Yes, that's a great question. Yes, it was more restrictive. And our tax said we need to make it align with the state code and make it less restrictive. And so that's what we've proposed. Thank you. That's a great question. Another section in 24-17-080 was municipal wellhead protection criteria. And this has no equivalent in state on-site septic system code. This is a local, this is only in our local code. And the overall purpose of this section of the municipal wellhead protection is to recognize that large public water systems for septics that are in those areas when there's a repair or update or new system have to meet a higher standard. One of the things that we changed in this code based on input that we got from our advisory committee and looking at it was when the code currently states that there's additional and this also addresses whether or not you need to connect the sewer if you're in one of these defined geographic areas. And so right now the code says you need to take certain action or have a different criteria for evaluating whether you keep septic or connect the public sewer, or if you need to add additional treatment to the septic system. And it incorporated the 10-year zone of contribution from the municipal well. The proposal we've made is that we're reducing that to the 1-year zone of contribution. We do not feel that, even though that changes that in most cases, if you look at the maps where they show those zones of contribution on like you can find those on GIS, it does make the geographic scope of the application of this part of the code smaller. What we do not believe that to be less protective. This only applies to new systems or repairs in those areas. Modern systems are intended to treat such that groundwater is not impacted. And the feedback that our advisory committee gave to us, which we thought was good feedback, was is it really needed in this larger zone? And there was some discussion, do we need it at all? What we felt was important is that we do need, and what I looked to when we were evaluating this was I looked to the county's critical aquifer recharge area code, and where, yeah, that 1-year zone of contribution, there are increased standards for many other types of businesses or waste handling, et cetera. And so what we felt was the right approach to this was to go to the 1-year zone of contribution. It aligns, I feel, nicely with the critical aquifer recharge area code, and it's responsive to the fact that these systems do a lot of treatment. and that having it in the 10-year was an additional burden because so certainly if you have to add treatment, that's an additional cost to the person that's getting the on-site septic system. So those were the factors that we weighed in making this proposed change. In the design section of the code, one of the changes that we've made is the code, and again, this is a local code. The state code leaves it up to the health officer to make a determination about whether a homeowner can do their own septic design. And currently, as the code's written, it allows the homeowner to do their own design for a gravity septic system. Based on our experience, a couple factors there is one is that those types of systems are, and those requests are super rare. The homeowner does have to do some due diligence and a test and things like that, but they're very rare. And our experience has always been they tend to be more complicated and more time consuming. And even modern gravity systems with the technology that most folks are using and the importance of certain factors when you're when you're designing and putting in a system, such as, what are the correct state approved products? What are certain land use requirements that designers and engineers are very familiar with as far as things like geotechnical hazard analysis? It's super critical to get the slope and topography captured correctly so that the system is designed to, especially even a gravity, so that the wastewater flows the way you need it to flow to get the best treatment and the best life out of the system. Because a lot of those factors, we felt it was better that we remove the homeowner self-design option from the code.
Chuck,
Yes.
when you say rare, can you quantify that a little bit? That's one question. Then the other question that I was just thinking about, what if the homeowner actually is a professional in that field? I guess they could, if they don't own the company, could have their company sign off or something. But those are a couple of questions. I guess I'd like a little, if you have it,
Okay.
more of a definition of rare.
Yeah, and so I realize now I didn't have a note that data, so that's a great question. I will make a note that we will provide a note to the council to give you a number, do some research to see how many. I mean, I will say that they're so rare. I can't think of one because most of these kinds of things come to my attention because we'll typically run into problems, but I will look into and get you a number. And certainly in the case of someone who's already a licensed engineer or designer, they can do their own, if they're a licensed engineer, they can do their own design per the code. And we don't license or certify designers and engineers. That's done at the state level through the Board of Licensing.
Thank you. And Chuck, I don't want you to go to any big trouble. If you say that it's so rare you can't even think of one, that's fine. I'll take your word for it.
We'll look for the number. I think it's a great question,
okay.
and I realized, I should have thought that would come up. So thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay. So moving on, so also in the design section, I put two of them on here. I'm not really saving paper, but it's a PowerPoint. But anyway, so the next section that we made a change to bring to your attention is there's a table in there that says what size tanks you need to use for depending on number of bedrooms, and which is basically also the size of the system. And we simplified that. And again, we made it match the state code. We actually had a more stringent standard. The biggest difference being that for 4-bedroom and smaller, you only need 1,000-gallon tank. Right now, the code says you need a 1,250,000 gallon tank. State code says 1,000. And then I don't show the rest of it, but then after each new bedroom added above 4, you need to add another 250 gallons. But basically, the change made it simpler and lowered the standard and as a cost effect for people putting in septic, because a 1,250 gallon tank is more expensive than a 1,000-gallon tank. And then the only other thing, and I just wanted to highlight this because this is super important to us, I don't think it's controversial at all. In the design, we've added just some specific word about securing lids. Because there's risers that generally come up to the ground for ease. Not in all cases. There's still a lot of, systems and tanks that are underground and you have to uncover them. But basically, anything that comes to the surface that has a lid that is of significant size, we just want to emphasize the importance of securing those lids, because those can become, in some cases, that luckily I'm not aware of any in our county in the recent, but you can have really bad accidents or deaths result if those lids are secured and someone falls into a tank or falls and really hurts himself badly. So that's in there to emphasize that important aspect of lids. Moving on to the installation part of the code. So this it sort of parallels our change. Like right now, the code allows a homeowner who owns their own property and who lives on their own property to install their own on-site septic system. And I did collect data on this. So anticipating the question, I'll just say that we have had roughly, and let me pull the data out so I've got it in front of me. We've had roughly 10 installations in the period from about 2017 to 2020 that staff pulled together. A couple of them went fine, but the majority of them we had problems with for a couple things. One is people put stuff in that didn't meet the standards, or they put it in incorrectly, or they put it in without even coming to get a permit or do the due diligence that's already in the code. If you're going to do a home installation, I think this code also causes confusion. A lot of people ask that question, can a homeowner put in their own septic system? And the short answer is yes. And so we've had situations where people just put them in and they haven't gone through the due diligence. They haven't, we have some testing requirements and things prior to having them put their own system in. And thirdly, again, similar to comments I made earlier, putting even a gravity system in with the modern technology and the need to make sure that everything flows and flows in the right direction, and that the drain fields are installed to the contours that are level and such that the gravity flow occurs in a way that you're getting the maximum benefit out of that drain. For all of those complex issues, understanding setbacks, even installers sometimes have to change things in the field when they put in a system based on the design comes in and maybe something on the ground has changed, or the owner has put something else in, like a stormwater system. And so again, we felt that it was better to leave that work to the certified installers. In regards to inspection and record drawings, we're making a shift in the process of the final drawing. So once a system's put in the ground, the current, and I'll go to the middle bullets real quick to explain the current system. So right now, our staff inspect all of the gravity installations and tank onlys installations in the county. So we go out to the field, the installer has left a diagram, a drawing, an as-built drawing. We review it, compare it to the design, and then we do the sign off on it unless there's corrections needed. And then we'll go back to the installer and or designer. The installer and the installers will do the as-built also for the tanks. Or they do those as-built for the gravity on-site septic system. I'm sorry. Designers and engineers right now actually are responsible and have been for quite a while here in the county. They do inspections of all the alternatives. And again, alternatives are anything above a gravity drainage or pump to gravity drainage. So that's pressure distribution, systems that require timing and dosing, systems that require aerobic treatment, additional treatment, either because of the waste load or because of the conditions of the soil. And so they do all of those. We audit some portion of those in the ground inspections, and we review the as-builts and sign off. And those final as-builts are done by the designers and engineers. We're proposing to move to a system where the designers and engineers are doing the final inspections and record drawings for all septic. So we're basically taking gravity and adding that to their to-do list. The benefits that we see from that process, the two primary benefits that we see is that I don't want to disparage the installers. We have a lot of really good installers, and there's a lot of them that do really good drawings, but the designers and engineers certainly have better tools to provide much more accurate as-built. And that's an important thing for the public record and for the homeowner from that point forward in the future. We also, because right now, because a lot of our time is taken up in looking at all the gravities, which are the simpler systems, we feel it's important by making this shift, we can spend more time, and our staff can put more time into also looking at more of the alternative systems as they're being installed and do more audits of those than we're capable of doing now under the current the current approach. And so that's the basis for this change and update to the code. And I guess I would emphasize again, we're always, the health department can go out to any system that we want to go to. So, and we do review all of those final records against the design. So it's not like they just turn it in and we just put it in the drawer. We do a review. If it's just paper, it's just paper, but we're looking forward to being able to get out to more of those alternative systems in the field as they're being installed or near completion of installation. So under the operation and maintenance section of the code, 24-17-0180, we did add language. We have had a waiver. So under state and the current writing of our local code, all gravity systems requirement for inspections every 3 years. And then every alternative system is every year. Back in 2012, the department went to the Department of Health, the State Department of Health, and asked to get a waiver for pressure distribution to only have to inspect every 2 years as opposed to every year. So the feedback we got about that was it was covered under the waiver, and most people that are in the industry understood that, but they thought it was important. Let's put it in the code so it's more explicit. And so we wrote that section of the code to the waiver is something I guess that Department of Health could rescind. We don't expect that to happen. But we thought it was still important to acknowledge it. And so it's explicit in the code that there is, it's every 2 years for pressure distribution under that waiver. And then we just added language that said, if the waiver did sunset, they would have to revert back to 1 year. But that's why that was done. So that doesn't change any requirement. It's just, and how we do things, it's just being more explicit about it in the code. So the other specific action we took is we did create a new section, which was a notice to title. And the reason we did that is all of the language in that section 185 is not new material. It is all existing notice to title language that has been in the code. But since that is such an important part of a lot of systems and recording notice to title for certain conditions, or certain requirements as far as maintaining the system, et cetera, that go with alternative systems, we just explicitly made a section about it to highlight that tool and the requirements for when you have to do a notice to title. In the septage management section of the code 220, we added a line in there to make it more explicit regarding dumping of septage directly on the ground. There was nothing in our local code that clearly addressed that situation. We get all of those calls, and we've had some situations where septage has been dumped, like from RVs on a property, or from a homeowner maybe has decided to clean their own tank and just leave it on. And so we added that to have a better explicit way to address those situations when they occur. Again, when something like that does occur, and in all of our compliance and enforcement, we go to the property and we say, this has to be corrected. And we try to remedy the situation. And as long as that's done, that's where it all ends. But that's why we added that to the code. So the certification section 240 of the code, it's a big part of the section because this covers our processes and requirements for certifying pumpers, O&M inspectors, and installers in the county. We do certify those at the county level. This basically in there's a lot of changes because we wanted to organize it better and make certain things clear. So you'll see a lot of changes in there, but most of them again are structural, organizational. Um, and so that's what they are. I will say the one content or one regulatory change we did make was we did require demonstration of a year of experience before someone under the tutelage of either an O&M specialist or an installer for someone to get a level 2 certification for those for O&M specialists, inspectors, and installers. And the reason there are 2 levels, and to explain the 2 levels, is level 1, pretty much in both cases for both installation and O&M, is someone who can do a gravity work on a gravity system, because alternative systems have all of these other electronic controls and more complicated systems. Only people that have a level 2 can inspect those. And so that's the essential difference between a level 1 and a level 2 inspector and installer. And so the feedback was, and we agreed, was we should require that there's a clear demonstrated year of experience at the 1 level, or enough experience that it was clear they could do level 2 inspections before getting that level of certification. So under the certification section, in section 8, in conflicts of interest, there were a couple of changes that we made. Well, there was one, what I would call significant change, which was that there was language in there that the designer, and I put it in quotes here, make reasonable allowances for the installer to use equivalent items or systems from other manufacturers. And we didn't feel that this part of the code was really needed and useful. First of all, we have not seen disputes of this nature for quite a while. As I did research on this section of the code and the basis for it, there had been, I want to say it was 80s, 90s era conflict between a designer who was proposing the system and certain installers who didn't like it. And so that was the history of it. We haven't had those kinds of disputes. The code is written now, the designer, because they've worked with the property owner and they've really given, they're out there doing the land analysis and all that other analysis. They're the key person that's working with the property owner on their system. Other parts of the code already emphasize that no substantial changes can be made to the installation without consulting the designer and the health department. So there's already health department involvement in that. Removing this language also does not prohibit installers from proposing alternatives that are equivalent. They just need to check in with the designer. And so by removing this, we're reinforcing the need to keep the designer involved when anything different is proposed, but it doesn't certainly prohibit an installer from offering an alternative if they feel it's appropriate when they're approached to do the installation. The other change, just to clarify it, is we do, and I think this buttresses the prior change and reinforces it also, is under conflicts of interest, because like a lot of these are businesses where someone has an inspection business and someone has a pumping business, or also is an installer. That's not, there's a few operators that have multiple businesses, and sometimes designers and engineers might have a contract with a certain manufacturer. And so under the conflicts of interest code, we just, and again, we didn't change any of that language, but what we do is they need to report to us when they have either multiple businesses or those types of relationships with manufacturers. And then we take that information and we provide it on our website, because when people contact us, we're always sending out information about who's certified, who are the certified professionals for inspection, pumping, and installation, and who are the designers that work in the county. And so again, it just allows, that's a consumer protection, consumer awareness step, so that they're aware, if so-and-so is proposing a certain product, oh yeah, that guy, if they look at that, hopefully they'll look at that, they have a license, so they might ask that question, like, what are there other products besides this one? So in the quality assurance section, there's this section of the code overall addresses our role to do quality assurance of the practitioners in the county. And it also addresses what I spoke to earlier, audits. There is a specific audit goal in the code that we didn't think was needed for how many audits would we do of alternative inspections. That's always been a difficult, those inspections have always been harder because of the other workload and services we provide. So we wanted to take that out. We are working, and through the policy that we're updating on inspections and audits, we're actually going to set a much higher goal than 10 for inspections and audits of all on-site septic systems. It's more of a performance metric and performance goal for the program. So again, I just wanted to spend time on highlighting those parts of the code that we felt were, significant enough change in certain policy practice or standard that I felt and we felt would be of most interest to you. Certainly, if I don't know who's had, some of you still may have some questions from what I've presented or from the material that's provided with the changes. And so I'd like to then take any questions from the council.
Madam Chair.
Councilor Bauman.
I have a few questions. First of all, I don't know, I'm not familiar with the magnitude of the issues at hand here. I'm wondering roughly how many homeowner sewage septic systems do we have in Clark County?
Yes, Councilor Bowerman, thank you. I didn't grab that number before this, but generally we're around 34,000, around 500 is the last number I had. It's always fluctuating because some systems are being decommissioned and hooked to sewer. We've certainly had a lot of development also. So those two things, but we've mostly stayed around that range of septic systems countywide, 34,500.
That is a lot. And
Yes.
roughly how many are added each year? Not repaired, but added.
Oh boy, added. So I don't have the answer to that question. That's a great question. And I will also say that I know some folks in community planning have been asking me for that data because they're collecting some of that. So I will get that number and provide that. I don't have it in front of me right now. That's a great question, though. I'll look into that.
The audits that you had provided, that 10%, which group of those systems were audited? Was it just the new ones? Was it those being repaired? What group was that?
So the audit language in the code right now is for alternative systems because we are going out to
or just new ones or what?
Just new ones. Yeah, just at the time they're installed. That's the code audit goal for alternative systems. We are inspecting on site all tank onlys and all gravity systems right now. And when we provide those numbers for new systems, I'll have it broken down into how many were gravity and how many were alternative and how many were tank. So you have that picture also.
That would be great. And if you could, and it will probably be obvious from your data, give us an understanding of which ones are being audited and will continue to be audited with the removal of that 10% from code.
Yeah, and again, I know I wanted to point that out. I pointed that out. Where our intention is to be able to audit more of the range of systems. Right now, we're looking at all the gravities, which is good, but because of the time and required for that and other services, we actually want to look at more than 10% of alternatives. And so that's our intention. Even though we've taken the 10% out of the code, our intention is by making that change and having the designers do also the gravity work, that we'll be able to look at more of the alternative systems than we've been able to in the recent in our recent history. But I will also look at how many we've audited.
Nothing holds you though to doing more, particularly as staff change and the years go along. So maybe at some point a number should be reinstated in code.
Okay. Appreciate that note. Okay.
Is that the conclusion of your questions, Councilor?
It is. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Other questions from the council?
Madam Chair, if I may,
Mr. Magbachi?
couple of comments and questions. The first is I'll follow up on what Karen was asking because I've been asking related questions for the last couple of years, and some of the answers are very elusive. And I think the highlighted number of 34,000 plus septic system, and I've heard that from state ecology too, is they're looking for point sources of discharge into our watershed. It shows the enormity of the challenge. We have a lot of septic systems and our population is growing in the rural county that requires them. So that elusive number I was getting to is, we have a system basically of voluntary inspections, and they vary in years. And the number that's elusive is how many are in compliance, because I haven't really gotten a legitimate answer from any of our staff. And as it compares to what's been printed in the press, because the press has written a couple stories regarding Whipple Creek and other areas. And so the compliance issue is a big one that we don't have our hands around because we don't necessarily have a very substantial compliance with the number of inspections. And it is certainly far better to inspect and maintain than find a system that has failed, because that impacts more than just the homeowner. It impacts our health and purity of water generally. And I've heard some pretty dramatically different numbers from in the very beginning. Oh, we have 100% compliance, to the newspaper printing that we have about 30% or more, in depending on the area, of non-compliance. So we don't have any kind of enforcement that I can see in place. So we need to get to that voluntary education and inspection for our general public. Related to that, when I first was looking into this, I did find out during a visit at Heritage Farms and our Small Farms Bureau, that there are grants and low-cost loans available to individual homeowners to remedy their system. So we do need to have a system in place that assists our citizens to be compliant. And so I'm hoping that we have that information readily available to anyone that touches this inspection issue, especially if they do have maintenance they need to get to or a replacement. So those are the general comments I have, and if you wish to comment on it, please do. But my one question is this, because I've heard it from several different constituents, that in Clark County, the pumping rate for septic systems is pretty darn high compared to everywhere else in the country. And I've been told that it has to do with where the discharge is, it's pumped into a tank and the tank goes and dumps it. And it's the per gallon charge that they get charged that gets passed on to the homeowner. And have we looked at alternatives to try to get those costs down so that people, when they're doing their regular inspections, if they need pumping, they can afford to do it?
Thank you, Councilor Medvigi. I will comment on several of the questions and issues that you've raised. They're super important. First, I will say, I can't attest to what other sources may be providing numbers on inspections. Our database absolutely records, as long as the inspector has submitted the report, the number of inspections that are completed versus and where they are in compliance with the inspection requirements of 1, 2, or 3 years. And so if there's ever a question from any counselor, where are we today on inspection numbers versus, or what's the percentage of folks that aren't in compliance with the inspection frequency? We are the ones that can answer that question. We have all of that data. And so to get to the numbers, and I can't reference other numbers if I don't know the source. When I started with the program in 2015, and I'm not taking any credit, this is all of my staff's good ideas and work. We were at about 50% compliance countywide. We then instituted an effort to really focus on notifying persons who were delinquent, who were behind on their inspections. So between about 2016 through about 2018, we rose up to 70% of compliance countywide on average. At any time, we would run those tests of those numbers. But basically, at that point, we have plateaued. We've continued those measures. And as far as the notification, we also send notices to remind people who are also still in compliance, just as a nice way to remind them, oh yeah, I got to call up my inspector person to come. So we're the ones that have those numbers. And those are the numbers for the last couple of years. We've plateaued at 70%. We are working, and I'll make one other quick comment. We are working on multiple fronts to try to find ways to do that. I think on the compliance side, you're right, it's voluntary. We do not do compliance enforcement solely for the basis of that someone's not up to date on their inspection. We actually do quite a bit of enforcement once we know there's a problem with the system. You know, we get an inspection report where there's a significant deficiency that needs to be remedied. And sometimes it can just be remedied without a new system. Sometimes it has to be a new system. And so we then enter into putting pressure on those folks to get to that point. Most of those go through and get done. The recalcitrant parties require slightly higher levels of enforcement. So I think in that regard, our enforcement program works really well, but we do not do it solely for inspections. The other thing I would say around the water quality concerns, you know, and I think I've sat in on some online meetings, so it's always hard to know who's at this meeting about water quality issues. We are actually, and along with a Public Works Clean Water Program, Clark Conservation District was just successful. You gave us permission to be a partner. We're a partner on a grant with them. That's a pollution identification and correction. And so that's getting off the ground right now. They won the grant. We're just a partner. We're not receiving any funds, but we're using the tools and the knowledge that we have to help get to those areas where we know we have bacteria problems in the river. This is focused in parts of the East Fork Lewis River. So we're always looking for ways to further those efforts and get higher compliance, and particularly where we know we have a problem. So we are continuing to work towards some of the concerns I think that you expressed, Councilor Medvigi, but we don't still go after people just for the sole reason of inspection. And the nice thing about that grant, and the reason we thought it was beneficial for us in clean water, I won't speak for the clean water program, but was those other organizations and those partners, and we really haven't traditionally had those kinds of relationships in this program. We're now working with them. They can actually help us do a lot more on the ground outreach and contact with folks in those regions. It's all part of the grant. So we're also going to get some better insight into how if that type of outreach helps get us. So there's a lot of potential positive outcomes of that work. So we're looking forward to do it, and we'll learn a lot from it. On the pumping rates, that question was forwarded to us yesterday, and we did a little bit of outreach and cursory research. We will provide a written response to those questions that were raised. I'll try to cover, there was a lot of information. I'll try to cover the important parts. First, I want to clarify that the department has we don't take a tipping fee. We don't add to the cost of getting rid of septage. That used to be how the O&M program was funded. I can't remember when that change was made. I want to say it's probably around 2012. We went to a different approach through an assessment process. So we don't have any factor. The only funds that we charge to certified persons is the annual recertification or new certification. It's right now for 2021, it's a $305 fee, and that just covers our cost for verifying, that their CEUs are up to date, verifying that they have all the right bonding and experience to do the work. So I reached out to City of Vancouver. Right now, the City of Vancouver has the only facility in the county that can accept septage waste. I don't want to speak for other, there's a few other, like there's Clark Public, no other, that's the only place to go. There is a facility in Longview, but again, the cost and time to run up to Longview right, is probably prohibitive or doesn't make business sense for pumpers. I just wanted to throw a few numbers out. So right now, and then I was told that the number that you use is not the cents per gallon, but the number of dollars per 1,000 gallons. So right now at City of Vancouver, their charge when the guy drives up to empty their septage tank is I'm getting my numbers mixed up. $155 per 1,000 gallons, which is 15.5 cents per gallon. And I reached out to City of Vancouver, also verified that number with them. They had recently done a rate analysis. And so a few of the numbers that I thought were comparable to bring up, we have more of this information and we'll forward it, is for example, the Three Rivers station that is up in Longview, their rate is $10 a gallon, or I'm sorry, I got to get my math in my head right. It's $100 per 1,000 gallons, so it's $10 per gallon. The city of Newburgh, Oregon, is $13 per gallon. City of Salem, Oregon, is $12 per gallon. So I think the rates, and then I looked up King County, and I wrote that down somewhere here in my notes, is 14.4 cents per gallon. So those were some of the municipal rates that accept these kinds of waste. We'll provide a little more context and background on that. So I feel from our perspective, it's a fairly standard, those numbers are in the ballpark of each other generally. And I can't explain exactly the full process.
Are you finished, Chuck? Maybe I guess he got, looks like we have technical difficulties here. So did that answer your question fairly well, Councilor G? It's
Yeah,
actually, it sounds,
I would say so. I think I got the answers pretty
yeah,
early on.
okay. Thank you. Looks like Chuck may be coming back on, but I just noted, it's interesting that that King County actually charges less than the city of Vancouver. However, if you look at the other jurisdictions, they're a whole lot more, Salem, Newburgh, etc. Chuck, welcome back.
Sorry, I don't know what happened. I know.
It's okay.
I heard that they all charged less, Madam Chair. Maybe I heard, because we're mixing up price per gallons per 1,000 gallons, I heard that all the rates were less than Vancouver.
No, that isn't what I heard.
Yeah, and I'm sorry I'm confusing that because I'm not using the same number. But we'll provide this in writing. We'll provide it to Kathleen, and she can forward it to all the counselors. Some of the information that we've been able to gather just since yesterday and seeing this question come up. The other two numbers I will mention is Spokane County, which I use Spokane County kind of as a litmus test on a lot of things because they're about the same size as Clark County population wise. I mean, obviously geographically, demographically, they're probably different, but theirs is 15 cents per gallon. And King County is 14.4 cents. The other resource I went to, I didn't go out and try to survey all of the pumpers, but in Home Advisor, which is one of those services where you can get contractors and things like that, I did do a search and they had an updated number in August of 2021. And I think you can find these regionalized. The number they had was on average, it cost $408 to clean or pump a septic tank. And that's generally, $400 to $500 is a number that we'll hear from people a lot. We don't look at those receipts. We don't get those specific records always. We get the actual pumping record, but not how much they were charged. So from our perspective, we did feel, and then it says most homeowners spend between $287 and $541 for pumping. That's kind of the range. So that's the information that we've been able to gather on that. And again, how much you have to pump is certainly a function of the waste loading and all that. So someone who's really using their system aggressively or has a large household, et cetera, you're going to need to pump more and less. But I think it's a great question and issue. We'll put this all together and forward this in writing to the council.
Thank you. Any other questions from the council? I don't see or hear any. And it looks like that concludes your presentation, Chuck. Thank you.
Okay.
I do want to make a comment. I do appreciate any time that our code is brought down, is no more excessive than the state requirements. So I want to compliment you on that, that there are several changes that actually reduce our code to be no more stringent than the state requirements. So that said, I guess this concludes this meeting, and our council will, we will sign back in at 10 o'clock because that's when we're scheduled to be in council time. So we have just a few minutes between now and then. Okay. I'll see you back at 10 o'clock, councilors. And thank you, Chuck.
Thank you very much for your time.